Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing okay. The sharp-eyed amongst you will notice that I am no longer in my favourite place of Truro Cathedral for a background, but instead my background today is the Jaffa Gate in the walls of the ancient city of Jerusalem. This is a memento of an amazing trip to that wonderful and complex city that I had a few years ago. There's a point to me having this background, so stay tuned. I was listening to the radio the other day, and if you've heard my thoughts before, you'll know that I get a lot of inspiration and reflection inspired by something I hear on the radio. And I heard mention of International Toilet Day. Now, I must confess I was a wee bit sceptical when I first heard that. I mean, toilets, really? But on reflection, toilets are a big deal everywhere, particularly in places which don't have them or have poor sanitation. Some of our own congregation have been to Uganda, which, like other places in the developing world, can lack the luxury of a functioning toilet that we take for granted. We at St. Kentigern's have been involved in toilet twinning. So Toilet Day is a big thing. There are a lot of these days throughout the year, and some of them are dreamt up by wily greeting card manufacturers or to sell a product or simply for fun. The International Day of Happiness sounds good, or International Dance Day, or World Tea Day. Close to my heart is the International Day of the Seafarer on the 25th of June, or Father's Day, which my kids remember every year when their mother phones them up that morning and reminds them. And the 21st of July, for example, is Lamington Day. That's an important day in Australia. I'd never heard of it. Not surprising, because a lamington is a sweet snack from Australia. It's a type of sticky cake. It's eaten for high tea. There's a great recipe online. So happy Lamington Day to my Australian friends. But it was another day of which really made me think. The International Day of the Widow. Now that's on the 23rd of June. The blurb online says it was established by the United Nations 10 years ago as a day of action to address the poverty and injustice faced by millions of widows and their dependents in many countries around the world. Had the writers of the Bible had the idea of internationally designated days, widows would have certainly made the cut. The stranger, the fatherless, and the widow are regularly mentioned throughout the Bible as needing special protection. And in the New Testament, Jesus pronounces a woe on those who devour widows' houses. That's at Matthew chapter 23, verse 24. And that message remains sadly relevant today, because in some parts of the world, widows' houses are still being devoured, sometimes by bulldozers or by wars or by corporate greed. But the most striking mention of a widow is the story of the raising of the son of the widow of Nain. Now that's at Luke, it's at chapter 7, verses 11 to 17. It's maybe not the best known story in the Bible, but it's very relevant. So to set the scene, Jesus is entering the city. And as he is going in, a funeral party is coming out. Now Luke tells us that the dead man is the only son of his mother, and the interesting thing is that Jesus had compassion for the widow. He raises the young man and gives him back to his mother, but the dead man is not the subject of the story. He has what you might call a walk-on part. And what's interesting here is that Jesus met the funeral party at the gate of the city. A gate marks a boundary or a threshold, and the gate of a city, particularly 2,000 years ago, marked a very significant boundary. Inside the city, there was the relative safety and peace of society of other people, but outside the city, beyond the walls, there was the graveyard, of course, but also bandits, wolves, and wilderness. If you've been to Jerusalem, you'll know that the ancient walled city still has its gates. There are 12 of them, famous ones like Zion Gate, the Damascus Gate, Herod's Gate, and behind me, the Jaffa Gate. These are wonderful names which resonate down through the millennia. Jerusalem has expanded far beyond the walls of the tiny ancient city, but the gates are still there. The city gates were a big thing in ancient times. So the widow whose son had died was at the city gate. She was about to cross this boundary and leave the security of the city. But Jesus restored a life, restored the fortunes of the widow, and turned the burial party round. An amazing story. We've all experienced some involuntary social distancing in our isolation over the last 4 months or so. And some of us, if we have fortunate circumstances, can even be heard congratulating each other on what aspects of the lockdown we've actually enjoyed, and some of it has been quite enjoyable. But it's worth remembering that widowhood is still, for many, as it was in the days of the Bible. It's an enforced exile from the security, comfort, and community of regular social life. And that the social isolation that many widows experience is not just a temporary blip, but can be a life sentence. We're all looking for silver linings just now in the midst of a rather big and unprecedented event. So could it just be that the more general and we hope temporary experience of social isolation will render us all the more sensitive to the more lasting state of isolation which others are suffering? If so, we may be able to use on our own account a wonderful verse from the book of Job. The blessing of him that was without hope came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing. Goodbye.